Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Good afternoon, welcome. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. It's also, the national theme is There's No Survivor Justice Without Racial Justice. And we would like to welcome you all and thank you for participating in our panel, our forum. The Women's Coalition presents Domestic Violence in Special Population. It's a virtual forum. The special population we'll be focused on this afternoon is the elderly, people with disabilities, people with behavioral health challenges, the LGBTQIA community, immigrants, and non-English speaking people, and our youth as well. Special population refers to our most vulnerable group of people in domestic violence who must overcome barriers that they are required. So they require special considerations and special opportunities for us to ensure that they are safe, free, and peaceful. They're almost double victimized because they have challenges in their own arena, and then in domestic violence is doubled. It's important for us to understand that oppression and vulnerabilities with the special population that they face, they interconnect with the historical, social, political context of domestic violence in our society. The saying is, no one is free till we all are free. We have to be sensitive and understanding and understand that there's no cookie cutter. Everybody is different. And it's how we treat people and how we speak to people. It's how we move forward as a community and as a group. So I'll begin with some instructions, since we have to have some instructions for us to operate. First, this is being recorded, so everybody will know it's being recorded. Please put your name, your email, and agency in the chat so that we can let you know when other forums or webinars or training coming up that you might be interested. So again, in the chat, put your name, your email, and the agency you represent. And if you're an individual, that's fine. Good afternoon, Ms. Ferris. Please keep your computer muted when not speaking. That's important. So if you're not speaking, we want you to keep your computer muted. Good afternoon, James, Judy and James. Please turn off your cameras when you get up or when you leave the room, because we don't want you to have any accidents. So make sure you turn off your camera when you're leaving the room or you have to get up. Most importantly, we need you to be muted if you're not having a conversation with us. Please fill out the poll that will be on the screen in a little bit. Before we get started, we would like you to fill out the poll. If you have any questions during this event, please raise your hand, or you can send a question in the chat to Ms. Sheelene Gumbs. So either when question is going on, you can use your hand signal on your computer under the chat piece, or you can send a chat, the question in the chat for us so we can respond as well. So you got two options. When people begin to share their experiences, and we hope you will, the recorder will be turned off so you can feel comfortable with sharing your experiences. So we want you to know that up front. To our panel, you have 5 to 7 minutes for your presentation and 3 extra minutes if questions is directed towards you. If you do not need your whole 5 to 7 minutes, panelists, you can leave your time open for people who have questions for you. For the audience, if you have questions, after we're going to introduce the panelists one by one, after each panelist speak, you can raise your hand and ask them a question. At the end of all of the panelists, we're going to have a question and answer section where you can ask the whole group more questions. You can make your own comments, however you want to do it. So when I said 3 minutes, that might sound short, but you will have time later to get in your questions and your comments and whatever you need, because this is about the community, this is about education, and this is about doing the right thing for our special population. So on that note, I would like to introduce our first panelist. And again, I want to welcome everybody in the chat. Hi to everybody. Thank you for putting your name in, the greetings all the way from Family Resource Center. Oh, we're going to do the poll first before the panelists come on board. We're doing the poll. So as I said earlier, we will do the poll, and after the poll, then I'll introduce the panelists. So in the meantime, we can keep adding our names and greetings to chat. I'm just so excited about the people that we have. There go our poll. Would you please take the opportunity right now to respond to the poll? It's short, sweet, and to the point. Thank you. Three questions. Answer them and just submit them. Greetings to our sister agency, Family Resource Center. Yay, thanks for being on board. We got some wonderful participants from the different agencies. We're just so excited. This is going to be a learning experience. Everybody will get to share. It's not going to be one way. You have questions, you have comments. We're going to open that opportunity because it's definitely, oh, wow, we got Michelle James, the RN. Hi. We got so many. Tanya, oh my goodness. I'm looking at the names and I'm getting all excited with all of the people that we have participating today. We have the mental health group from the Patricia Fattel. Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're here and able to contribute as we move forward. So we will be closing the poll in about 10 seconds. So you got 10 more seconds. Please respond to the poll because it helps us with future workshops and future presentations. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being on board. We're so excited you're all on board. Uh-oh, our special deviant special population virtual forum poll 1 is up. Do you know what is meant? Do you know what is meant by the term domestic violence? Wow, 100% said yes. Well, so this is a serious educated group. Okay, that's a good thing. We had for number 2, we had, do you know someone who's experienced domestic violence? 92% said yes. And that makes a lot of sense. 8% said no, but at least 92 people that's here know someone that experienced domestic violence. And number 3, do you think domestic violence is a problem in marginalized communities? And 89 say yes, exactly. That's why we're doing this presentation today. And 5% said no, 8% said they're not sure. And I am so glad we got all these honest answers because I believe at the end of the session, we'll be clearer about if it is marginalized or not. So thank everybody. Thank you all for filling out the poll. We appreciate that, and we appreciate your honesty. So we're going to move on now to our panelists. We finished the poll, so we'll move on to the panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Patsy Gutry. She's a career educator in the Virgin Islands Department of Education. She worked as an elementary teacher and guidance counselor for the first part of her work life. Dr. Gutry is a nationally certified counselor and nationally certified school psychologist, providing psychological services to students from ages 2 to 21. She facilitates groups on caregiving and grief and loss, which has attracted seniors as participants for the past 20 years. Additionally, she's an advocate with the Women's Coalition for over 20 years and responds to victims of all ages. Join with me and welcome Dr. Gutry. Thank you, Dr. Gutry. You are our first panelist. You have it.
You're still muted. We can't hear you, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize. I was speaking and I was muted. Yes, so sorry about that. So welcome to our forum. I'm delighted to be a part of this forum and to be a panelist. And my segment of this panel is to talk on domestic violence in senior citizens. So let's start with the definition. The first thing I'd like you to think about when we think of senior citizens is people who are, say, ages 60 and older, and the 60 age group might be the younger older, and then the 70 plus, they would be the older plus. And so when you think of domestic violence, first of all, think of relationships and think of the relationship of domestic violence happens when someone you trust or you have a close relationship with uses power and control to cause harm in different areas of your life. For example, it could be physical harm, it could be emotional harm, or it could be financial harm. Any of these could be an area of harm. Next. So elder abuse, domestic violence is actually one aspect of elder abuse. So elder abuse would be the umbrella, and domestic violence would be one of those things that come or falls under elder abuse. So who are the usual perpetrators of domestic violence in elders? Usually is someone close to the person. And top of the list would be partners and spouses, but they're not the only ones. Domestic violence in senior citizens, unfortunately, also happens between parent-child and even grandparent and children. It happens when the older people or the older victims become especially dependent on the ones they trust and the ones they love. And because of this trusting relationship, it's easy and they're very vulnerable. Domestic violence in senior citizens or in older adults happens in all cultures, all communities, all religious faith. And domestic violence in seniors actually happens, I would say, across the lifespan. Because in some cases, the abuse really started many years before, but now that the person is older, it is more prevalent or maybe more distinct. All right, so females are the usual victims, but rest assured that it also happened to males. And right here in the coalition, I know that the coalition responds to both male and female. And if you read the paper maybe back in September of this year, you would see, or even hear when St. Clair William reads out the paper of women perpetrating the domestic violence on their partners. Now, usually the type of individuals that engage in this form of domestic violence against seniors are people with some sort of mental illness, or people who are perhaps abusing some form of drug, or even individuals who depend on the senior for their upkeep, and so find it easy to manipulate or do whatever it takes to have that power and control. Next slide, please. How does DV happen? Well, it happens in various forms. It happens in many ways, but some of the ways are listed here, and they can include isolating the victim, keeping them from their loved ones, controlling who they speak to when they get to use the phone, taking advantage of them in every way or form that you can think about. And manipulation is a really key factor in domestic violence situations in the senior citizen population. Next. Understanding the victim. Well, one thing we need to understand with domestic violence in general is that, first of all, like we said at the onset, domestic violence happens with people that you trust, people that you care for, that are close to you as a victim. And the way to understand the victim is to understand that they love their partners, they love their spouses, and they even love their caregivers. But when they finally have to reach out for help, it's because it's become a bit overbearing. And there are many reasons why they don't necessarily reach out at the very beginning, because when, you know, it might be a generational thing, or it might be because of their religious or cultural beliefs about their partners. All right, for example, what happens in the family stays in the family. And so individuals often suffer unnecessarily. Next slide. Okay, ways to help. Even though we know that many times domestic violence occurs in younger, hot-blooded individuals, as we say, it's actually happening across the lifespan, and it's happening in all communities. And because of that, no matter who the victim is, take time to listen. That's a key intervention that works across all ages of domestic victims. Always show compassion and show that you care. Respect the victim, respect their wishes. Refer them to help. That's very important, because our community does have people who help, particularly the Women Coalition, who caters to all victims. And remember that the victim can get help and refer them to help. So basically, that's my portion for this section. Thank you.
Good job. Good job. I love all the points. So at this point, if anyone have a question for Dr. Gutry, you can raise your hand if she want to answer, if you want to add anything else. But if you have any questions from her presentation, you're welcome at this point to raise your hand, and we will take the questions if anybody would like before we move to the next speaker. Let's take I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it. She said a lot. It was really good. I like the part about respecting them and letting them make their choices, and then sending them to people who are there for them. So I thought that was pretty cool too. So again, Dr. Guthrie, thank you so much for an excellent presentation. Just stay on board because you know we got more questions and answers later. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move to our next presenter. I don't see any questions. Okay, our next presenter is Attorney Archie Jennings he's the Director of Advocacy and Assistance to the Executive Director. Archie Jennings began his legal career as attorney with the Legal Aid Society in the state of Ohio, where he represented hundreds of clients in cases involving employment, elder law, housing, transportation, and neighborhood economic development. In 1982, Archie joined Legal Services of the Virgin Islands, litigation coordinator for a period of 4 years, where he spearheaded class action litigations covering such matters as special education, housing, waiting lists, healthcare service. He's been busy, income maintenance issues. Archie was then engaged in the private practice of law from 1986 and 2004. Archie joined DRCVI as the managing attorney. In addition to handling cases, he is responsible for supervision, training, skill development of DRCVI advocacy, outreach, and staff. He's a certified mediator, a graduate of Ohio Wesleyan University, where he majored in economics. He holds a Juris Doctorate degree from the University of Denver College of Law. So he is on. Attorney Jennings,
Yes,
you
can
have
you
the
hear me?
floor if you're ready. Thank you so much for being here.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. If you could speak up a
Okay.
little bit more, it might be good, might help though, if you can speak up just a little bit more.
All right, is that
There you
better?
go. That's good.
Okay. Actually, I'll explain what the agency is. The Disability Rights Center of the Virgin Islands is a cross-disability program geared toward assuring the equal rights of persons with disabilities under the law. Now, this is called a protection and advocacy agency. As well as protecting civil rights, we advocate for greater equality for persons with disabilities within the society. So, and as an adjunct or the basis for the protection advocacy system was to make sure persons in certain facilities were not discriminated against and are to be provided community supports and services so they would not be institutionalized. We are a federally funded program, and there's like 8 federal statutes that are braided together to provide these services. The 2 major statutes are protection and advocacy for the developmentally disabled and protection and advocacy for the mentally ill. Both of these were geared toward giving protection from abuse and neglect for persons in facilities. After that was protection and advocacy for the individual rights of parties, as well as protection and advocacy for persons who are beneficiaries of Social Security. It's through those 4 programs that we're able to provide services from birth through to the aged and elderly. Essentially, we're across disability, so we look at persons who are not only adults, but elder adults from 24 to 64, age 24 to 64, and plus 64 plus. So our basic programs are covering elders and dependent adults in their home setting through those extra civil rights statutes. The way our services work is that we are a small agency. We cover the entire total Virgin Islands. If someone has a complaint with regard to abuse, this is including physical abuse, abuse of a person physically, they can call our agency in order to initiate an investigation. It's through that investigation that we would use what would be under the Virgin Islands law, the anti-abuse elder and dependent adult statute, to determine if there is a mandatory requirement for reporting the abuse. Under the law, then Department of Human Services would get involved, and they also have a right to turn that matter over to the local police department. Our major focus at that hopefully comes preventing abuse and neglect within a home setting by giving out training to persons and family members. So if they need help and assistance, they're able to get the help and assistance for their elderly or adult child before it becomes a problem within the home setting. Part of that includes either giving, for legal purposes, either a power of attorney or helping establish a guardianship with regard to the person who needs assistance or help. Many of the conflicts within the family comes about because of the need to assure that persons who are elderly or adult dependents have the basic income and services available to them from public entities. That would include Medicare, Medicaid, where appropriate, eligible income, mainly for maybe a dependent from person with Social Security disability, and housing, of course. And we do receive cases under housing, make sure that persons with disabilities may have accessible housing, and we would assist in assuring that comes about from either VI Housing Authority or through Section 8, private landlords. But generally speaking, those persons who need housing are those who are in the streets because of mental illness, as well as those who are institutionalized off island. So we also work to, under the protection and advocacy for the mentally ill, to advocate to return those who are present in facilities outside of the Virgin Islands, to bring them back to the Virgin Islands, to their communities, so they can have community supports and services. That's a major program that's being expanded across the nation as they find more abuse and neglect in a lot of these residential facilities that exist in different states. So we, again, have a philosophy that persons with disabilities have access to age-appropriate services and supports that are shaped to fulfill their unique needs and preferences as an individual within society. And that people who have disabilities have the right to make choices about all aspects of their life, including daily routines and major events. One of the later changes that came about in the Virgin Islands is the passage of an updated Guardianship Act, which arranges for persons to have shared responsibilities under the guardianship and shared duties under the guardianship, so that a person is not totally at the beck and call of the person who's the guardian. So this is an act that was passed in 2017. It's being developed. I guess the court, as they go through and courts make decisions in family court, letting people know that they have the ability to not give up all their rights and all their control to someone else under the new Guardianship Act is very critical in developing and making sure they're aware of their options. All of our services are client directed, meaning that they're client centered, and hopefully they don't fall through the cracks within the available services in the Virgin Islands. Part of what I also try to do is build advocacy groups who can advocate on behalf of the persons who can't advocate for themselves. So that's where we come into building support and services for nonprofit groups as well, in order to fulfill the gaps that the government can't, and try to build public-private partnerships amongst the nonprofits and the government services so that a person has total coverage under the safety nets that's built here in the Virgin Islands. So it's a big picture, is to make sure we try to address cross disability and to have total access for persons with different disabilities here in the Virgin Islands. And again, I'm available for any questions you may have about how our services are rendered here in the Virgin Islands. We're located on St. Croix in Center Island at 772-1212, and on St. Thomas at 776-4303. And remember, we do screen first before the cases are open for investigation. That if you have any questions, I'll remain online.
Thank you so much, Attorney Jennings. Do anyone have any questions? You can put your hand up, or you can put it in the chat to Ms. Gumbs, and we will read it out. So we'll take a few minutes to see if anybody have any questions. No? Attorney Jennings, thank you for a very lightning presentation. We appreciate you. And please stay around for the big question and answering a little later. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go to our next presenter, and it's Dr. Muriel Nesbitt. She's a mental health counselor at the St. Thomas St. Croix Vet Center, where she provides a readjustment counseling to veterans and their family members. She has a background as a sexual assault victim advocate and has worked with survivors of intimate partner violence. Dr. Nesbitt is also an advocate for the LGBTQIA population here in the territory. She is currently partnering with other members of the community to bring PFLAG, Parents and Families of Lesbian and Gay, to St. Thomas. Welcome, Dr. Nesbitt. You have the floor. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, so my presentation, like she said, is about domestic violence within the LGBTQ community. Like the poster says, it happens to us too, because a lot of people don't feel like when they hear domestic violence, they don't immediately think of the LGBTQ population. Next slide. So the statistics within the LGBTQIA community as it relates to domestic violence is very much underreported. So the statistics that we have here, even though they're going to seem super extreme, just know that these numbers are not the true numbers because it's an underreported crime within this population. So 44% of lesbians and 61% of bisexual women have experienced rape, sexual violence, or stalking by an intimate partner. This is compared to only 35% in heterosexual women. And I didn't mean to say only, just, comparison. When it comes to gay men, 26% of gay men and 37% of bisexual men have experienced rape, sexual violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, compared to 29% of heterosexual men. In a study of same-sex relationships, only 26% of men called police for assistance when they experienced domestic violence, but this was only after it came to the point where it was a near-death situation, where the violence was nearly lethal. Transgender victims are more likely to experience intimate partner violence in public compared to those who do not identify as transgender. So a transgender man or female could be beaten up in public and people are apprehensive to say something or do something because a lot of times they don't want to get involved. They don't understand what's going on. It's not my problem. I'll just let that play itself out. Transgender individuals also suffer a greater burden of intimate partner violence than their lesbian and gay counterparts. So even within the LGBTQ community, there's still some variations. Transgender men usually suffer a lot worse. Transgender victims of intimate partner violence also face a lot of threats and intimidation and harassment and police violence within the intimate partner violence. So they're having these intimate partner violence and also dealing with police intimidation, to violence from the community. So it's so much more compounded. Within the LGBTQ community, Black and African American victims are more likely to experience intimate partner violence compared to those who do not identify as African Americans. Slide. So what does domestic violence look like within the LGBTQ community? It is a lot similar to the non-LGBTQIA community, but there are some variations. So these are not all of the ways that domestic violence plays out within this community. These are just some of the major ones. So verbal abuse, attacking the victim's identity, saying, you know, you don't look like a real woman, or no one will date a queer, and basically beating them down with verbal abuse to where they're even afraid to say something, they're afraid to do anything about it, just having to deal with all these verbal attacks within their intimate partner relationships. Outing. So the abuser might threaten, if you don't do what I say, if you don't act in this way, if you don't basically accept this abuse, I'm going to out you. I'm going to let everybody know. And not everybody within the LGBTQIA community is ready to say, hey, I am, you know, a lesbian, I'm gay, and whatever. It's up to them and at their own timing, where they should be able to say, this is who I am. But their partners or the abusers would use this as a way to maintain dominance in the relationship and holding that over their head as a threat. If you don't do these things, if I don't get my way, I'm going to out you. Using derogatory language, such as refusal to use that person's preferred pronouns. This is more prominent within the transgender community because in most cases, transgender individual preferred pronouns are they and them, but an abuser might refer to them as it, or, you know, other, or something else that's already derogatory and dehumanizing. A lot of times these individuals already feel dehumanized by the world. They don't need to experience this within their intimate partnerships. Using physical and sexual violence. So forcing a person to do something based on their gender identity, like saying, oh, you like both men and women, so you must be into this, or you must like this, or I expect you to do this, or you should know what this is like, just based on their gender identity, assuming that they no longer have autonomy in the relationship. They no longer have a voice. They no longer have boundaries because their abuser is saying, well, you're into these people, you're into guys and girls, or you're into this, you must be also into this. So using that as a form of violence, sexual abuse violence, which also can turn physical. And another one is posting the relationship status. That is a form of abuse. Not everybody is ready to say, you know, identify who they are as a sexual being. They're not ready to reveal their sexual identity or sexual orientation. It should be up to them, their own time, their own comfort level, and then say it to who they want to say. But an abuser might say, okay, we're in this together. I'm going to post this on Facebook. I'm going to post her status and you can't say anything about it. Now that person is forced to reveal something that's very private for them, maybe very intimate for them, to the entire world. And that's also a form of abuse. Okay, so why does this stuff happen? Most of the abusers know that their victims might not report these things. All the things that I just discussed, they might not say, then might not want to report this. They might not want to go to the police. They might not want to tell a friend or a family member because first of all, they might feel shame or embarrassment. Many victims within the LGBTQIA community struggle with shame already around their sexual orientation. They sometimes live in communities that make them feel that shame. And now the abusers are reinforcing that shame and using that as a way to get power and control over that individual. Another reason is their fear of not being taken seriously. These victims are often less likely to report these violent interactions because they feel like, who's going to believe me? Who's going to listen to me? Most people think that this happens because of the lifestyle I'm living. If I wasn't living this way, then this wouldn't happen. And some people just don't understand. Some people are not just don't understand what it's like to be in a same-sex relationship or an LGBTQIA relationship. So the victim might say, I'm not going to report because nobody is going to understand. I experienced this myself. I worked as a sexual assault victims advocate, and I had a male that was sexually assaulted and violently beaten by his intimate partner. I met with him at the hospital because I was his advocate. When the police showed up, the police automatically assumed that I was the victim. And I said, no, I'm not the one. The victim is right over there. And the police chuckled. And I know he didn't mean to do that, but it was so automatic for him to think that that was funny. And the victim just got up and left, and I hadn't seen him since. But in that situation, he probably was already afraid to come forward and said that this happened to me. And for that to be the first reaction he got from a police. This happens a lot within the LGBTQ community. And this is why sometimes victims are less likely to come forward, because this is the kind of stuff that they can look forward to. Another reason they may not report is because they might feel like there's less legal protection for them. A lot of states don't really have laws yet that protect the LGBTQIA community. And even if they do have laws, the laws are written in such a way that it might not end up being protection. So a lot of times they won't report because there's nothing to protect them. And another reason is they might not report because they don't want to lose their community. If they're living in a family that does not accept their lifestyle, and by reporting, now they're having to let their family members know, maybe let their community know, maybe let their job know, just people are going to find out. They feel like they might lose the community, and community might be the most important thing that they have that's keeping them going. So the fear of losing that might silence them from reporting that these things are happening to them. Okay, so what can we do to help? First thing we can do is be an ally. Being an ally means standing up for people of the LGBTQIA community. It means if you see somebody being mistreated, if you see somebody being talked down to, if you see somebody at work being very derogatory against somebody of the LGBTQIA community, stand up and say something. Say that that's not right. Don't allow discrimination to just happen around you and engage in that without saying something, because being an ally is being a friend. If you are a service provider, make sure that you're attending LGBTQIA trainings. There are a lot of affirmative trainings out there that help you to understand, get a better understanding of the best ways and the best practices to provide services to people of the LGBTQIA community that maybe have faced sexual violence or domestic violence. So there's so many trainings out there that's available. So if you're a service provider, make sure that you are engaging in those trainings so you're providing the best quality of care. Advocating for improved care. So advocacy can be human rights advocacy, personal advocacy, just speaking up for improvement in care. I know a lot of hospitals now, they have literature in the hospitals about the LGBTQIA community, the transgender community, so that people that are providing these services are aware of how, the best way to approach these individuals. But this also needs to happen within the police department, people who are dispatched to these kinds of crimes. So make sure that in your advocacy that you're including this population because they really need it. Donating. Donations are always great. There are many organizations out there that can benefit from your donation because these donations provide services for domestic violence victims, especially the LGBTQIA community. A lot of them, if something is happening, domestic violence, most domestic violence survivors, sometimes they have to leave a situation and leave everything behind. And the next place they go, they might not have anything. They might be starting from scratch. So your donations basically can be life or death for them. So there are many organizations out there that you can donate to, search them on the internet, and just, again, donating is also being an ally. And then finally, do your homework. Not everybody knows everything about the LGBTQIA community. Nobody expects everybody to know everything, but there's a lot of information out there that you can educate yourself. And educating yourself doesn't mean asking the next gay person you meet about what it's like to be, within this community. But there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of classes, there's a lot of workshops, there's a lot of books that you can read, just so you're educating yourself and you're not creating further damage to a population that's already very fragile. And okay, so these are the resources that are available. There's a lot of hotlines and helplines available for people specifically within the LGBTQ community. The first one is the National Helpline. It's open Monday, pretty much 7 days a week, but the hours vary every day. The second one is the LGBT National Youth Hotline, and this is for people ages 12 to 18, no gender variation, so male, females, whatever, just within that age range. The Trevor Project is available 24 hours a day. It's a crisis line and a suicide prevention line for ages 13 to 24. And then the last one is, this was recently created, I think within the last few years, it's the Trans Lifeline, specifically for transgender individuals, but anybody can call and you'll still receive services from them. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And let me know if you have any questions.
That was excellent, and thank you so much. And of course, we have more resources at the end, but on this helpline and hotlines, we don't want you to forget in St. Thomas, you can also call Family Resource Center for LGBTQIA, and the same for the Women's Coalition on St. Croix. Both agencies provide services for the LGBT community as well. Anybody have any questions or anything you want to ask? You're also quiet. Any questions? You can put your hand up. You can send a question to chat. If you're not comfortable with putting your hand up, you can send it to chat to Ms. Gumbs and we'll get a response. Or we can give you more time to warm up. All right then. Okay, so we'll move to our next presenter, which is Mr. Carnell Troutman. He's a husband married to Barbara Hill Troutman for 39 years, a father of 4, Eric, Kevin, Kenya, and Khaleesi. Khaleesi Troutman is the environmental outreach coordinator at the East End Marine Park. He has a master's in public administration from UVI. He's a member of the first class of public managers in the VI. He's a Department of Health employee for 29 plus years. 19 of those years have been in mental health. He's the former director of the Men's Coalition of the Virgin Islands, Batterer Intervention Program Manager for the Men's Coalition, Batterers Education Group Facilitator, developed and started the Rites of Passage program, a comprehensive manhood training program for boys 7 to 12 years old. He developed and facilitated an anger management program for the Men's Coalition in 1999. And last of all, he's a member of Omega Psi Phi fraternity as well. With no further ado, we'd like to welcome Mr. Carnell Troutman, who has worked along with the Women's Coalition for years. He actually took our training some years back. So we would like to welcome Mr. Troutman. Mr. Troutman will be speaking on domestic violence and behavioral health. And you got it, Mr. Troutman.
Can you hear me?
Welcome. Yeah, good afternoon. Speak up a little bit.
Okay, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, I want to start off with a couple of definitions. The first one is, what is mental health? Mental health is a broad term with multiple definitions and descriptions. Mental health is about how our mind deals with feelings such as stress, happiness, or sadness, and the actions and the choices that we make. What is mental illness? Mental illnesses are specific conditions that negatively affect how a person thinks, feels, or behaves. Examples of mental illnesses include anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Okay, what is good mental health? What does it look like? People with good mental health, they have a sense of contentment. a zest for living, and the ability to laugh and have fun, the ability to deal with stress and bounce back from adversity. We call that resiliency. A sense of meaning and purpose in their activities and relationships, the flexibility to learn new things and adapt to change, a balance between work and play, rest and activity, the ability to build and maintain fulfilling relationships. They have self-confidence and a sense of high self-esteem. Next slide. Okay, now these are some of the symptoms, if you have them, that may suggest that you might need a little help and attention. If you have an inability to sleep, if you feel down, hopeless, or helpless most of the time, concentration problems that are interfering with your work or home life, if you're using nicotine, food, drugs, or alcohol to cope with difficult emotions, negative or self-destructive thoughts or fears that you can't control, or if you have thoughts of death or suicide. If you're experiencing any of these symptoms, it might be a good idea to get some help to talk to someone. Resilience and mental and emotional health. Being emotionally and mentally healthy doesn't mean that you never go through bad times or experience emotional problems. We all go through disappointments, loss, and change. And while these are normal parts of life, they can still cause sadness, anxiety, and stress. The difference is that people with good emotional health have an ability to bounce back from adversity, trauma, and stress. This ability is called resilience. People who are emotionally and mentally healthy have the tools for coping with difficult situations and maintaining a positive outlook. They remain focused, flexible, and creative in bad times as well as good. One of the keys in resilience is the ability to balance stress and your emotions. The capacity to recognize your emotions and express them appropriately helps you avoid getting stuck in depression, anxiety, or other negative mood states. Another key factor is having a strong support system. And this is something that we can't stress enough. Having trusted people you can turn to for encouragement and support will boost your resilience in tough times. Next slide. The problem of stigma. Stigma related to mental illness and domestic violence exacerbates the difficulty facing persons in need of assistance. Stigma is when someone, or even yourself, views a person in a negative way just because they have a mental health condition or are a victim of domestic violence. Some people describe stigma as a feeling of shame or judgment from someone else. Stigma can even come from an internal place, confusing feeling bad with being bad. Navigating life with a mental health condition or domestic violence issue is tough. The isolation, blame, and secrecy that is often encouraged by stigma creates huge challenges to reaching out and getting needed support. People experiencing mental health and domestic violence issues often face rejection, bullying, and discrimination. Unfortunately, much of the relationship between African Americans and therapy is rooted in a history of oppression and fear, the effects of which remain today. Although the perception of therapy is changing, therapy is still seen as something for white people. Black men, many of whom have experienced great trauma, are among the least likely to access mental health services because they don't want to be seen as weak. Next slide. The problem of domestic violence. Domestic violence is a widespread problem with ever increasing lethal consequences to victims, families, and the communities in which they live. Domestic violence is a pattern of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse that batterers direct at their intimate partners. Sometimes the same abusive pattern is present in adolescent and dating relationships. The violence may result in death, permanent physical injury, or cause profound emotional damage to the victim. Not only are the primary victims affected, but so are the children who witness this abuse or who themselves abuse as part of the pattern. Of the children who witness domestic violence, it is believed that more than half of the boys will eventually become batterers, while half of the girls will become victims. Domestic violence does not select its victims. It can and does happen to women of every race, culture, age, religion, or socioeconomic background. Next slide. The relationship between domestic violence and mental illness. Manipulative partners. A diagnosis of mental illness is often viewed by abusive partners as a tool for control. For instance, the partner may not allow the victim to go anywhere by themselves as they see themselves as his or her micromanager. An abusive partner may tell their victim that she's a bad mother and unable to care for the children because of their illness. The partner may attempt to speak on behalf of the victim or deliberately mislead them, often related to financial matters. The partner may also attempt to control or withhold the victim's medication, further increasing the abuser's power and control over the victim. The abuser frequently reminds the victim that nobody's going to listen to you because everyone knows you're crazy. If the victim does attempt to speak up, the question then becomes who to believe. According to statistics, more than half of the physically abused women suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, as well as depression. A significant amount of these women also suffer from anxiety. It has been shown that homeless women with mental illnesses are more likely to be abused. Next slide. Oh, in closing, high incidences of gun violence, domestic violence, and persons seeking assistance for mental health issues should qualify as a public health emergency. People of African descent have a long history of being resilient, the ability to bounce back from adversity, trauma, and stress. I believe that our sense of community and spirituality are the foundations of our resilience. That foundation has been under attack for some time from forces both internal and external. There's a Ghanaian proverb, the destruction of a civilization begins in the homes of its people. If our homes are no longer safe, how can our communities be safe? Where is the respect, love, and care we used to have for one another? And how can we help? Number one, believe victims. Number two, educate yourself and others to dispel false ideas. Mental health issues are not the result of personal weakness, lack of character, or poor upbringing. Number three, see the person, not the condition. Whether you are a friend, family member, caregiver, or medical professional, getting to know a person and treating them with kindness and empathy means far more than just knowing what they're going through. Number four, increase efforts to teach Black men that taking control of their health is an act of power, not weakness. And number five, make our homes safe again. And that concludes my presentation.
Oh, that was good information, Mr. Trotman. Thank you so much of showing the intersection between domestic violence and behavior health and how it interplays, because we see it regularly in our office, and I'm sure you see it over there as well. Do anybody have any questions for Mr. Trotman? No? Good job, Mr. Trotman, is one of the messages we got. Yeah. Good information. Anybody else want to add questions or comments? That was really good. I mean, we see into domestic violence and behavior health playing out all the time in our office. So hopefully we'll get a little more into it when we get to the big question and answers. So if there's no questions or other comments, I guess we'll move to our next speaker. Thank you so much, Mr. Troutman. Good presentation. Well, here we go. This is Attorney Krissta Kirschenheiter. She's the manager attorney for St. Thomas Office of Legal Services of the Virgin Islands. She has worked for various offices of Legal Services Corporation for more than a decade. As an attorney, Krissta has devoted her career to representing low-income indigent people in a variety of civil legal matters, including immigration, family law, housing, consumer, public benefits, and disaster relief and recovery. Prior to moving to the Virgin Islands, she worked as a dual role and a staff attorney in Saipan, which is interesting, which was previously her home, and she got the opportunity to go back where she grew up before she came to St. Croix prior to coming here. She also worked as a direct attorney, as a direct and attorney in Nevada, legal service pro bono. So we see her love is really helping the underserved, overseeing pro bono work, low-income clients throughout the entire area before becoming the director of legal services. So with over 10 years or more experience, she was in Nevada, she was in Saipan. She graduated from law school, University of Nevada in 2009, and she has a bachelor's in history from the University of Hawaii. Interesting. And with that note, we present to you Attorney Krissta, who would be looking at domestic violence and immigration. Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for being a part of our panel.
Yeah, thank you for that nice introduction. I'll also add that I've been working with immigrants in the legal ramifications of immigrants for about 13 years now. All of my legal work has been focused on civil law, but when we're talking about immigrants, it does go both criminal and civil, and there's a lot of overlap. When we're talking about immigration benefits, though, that tends to be a civil issue. So here on the first slide, I say here, immigrant victims of domestic violence might fear reporting for various reasons. I'd be interested at the end of this presentation to hear if anyone has some other ideas on things that you might want to add to this. But I put a couple that come to mind, reasons why immigrants may fear reporting. And if you've ever dealt with immigrant populations, oftentimes they seem to be very secretive and keep information. And these are some of the reasons why they may do that. Fear of removal from the country. The general term that people use is deportation. The immigration services tends to use the word removal now, but just a fear of being, forced to leave the United States and being forced to leave here. Imprisonment, whether that be for criminal reasons or for immigration reasons. Separation from family. We see that often with victims, afraid to be pulled from their children, especially if the children tend to be US citizens and the parent may not be. Oftentimes the abuser will use that immigration status to threaten people and be feared from their family members. A lack of resources, that can be very broad. It can be financial, it can be the ability to support themselves, even having something as simple as a work authorization, they may not have that. So oftentimes they will stay in abusive situations. And then there's this unfamiliarity with the laws. Immigrants move here from other countries. They may know their laws. They don't necessarily know our laws here. And so they may not know what options they have or what consequences they may experience. And oftentimes abusers will use that against them. So they may think if they go and report domestic violence to the police, for example, they could be put in jail. And then, of course, there's language barriers. I should probably have added cultural barriers, but when you can't communicate and explain yourself, and perhaps your abuser is fluent in English, that can be trouble. So we'll go to the next slide. I wanted to just touch upon this idea of what is a limited English proficient individual, an LEP. You may have heard that term, it's often used. So really what that means under the law is that the person doesn't speak English as their primary language. And so they may have a limited ability to read, speak, write, understand English. Under federal law, under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is a very broad federal law, as you all know, it actually does prohibit discrimination on the basis of national origin. And so that ties in with this idea that if an agency receives federal funds and an individual is from a different country and is being discriminated on services, that might violate federal law. And in that case, they're entitled to basically translation and supportive services. So it's very kind of complicated and complex, but generally immigrants may be entitled to English language assistance depending on what sort of benefit they're seeking. If federal funds are involved in the service provider, then most likely they're entitled. It also depends on what their primary language is. Here in the Virgin Islands, it's if they speak Spanish or Haitian Creole, then they're entitled to an interpreter because it's more than 5% of the population speaks that language, then they're entitled under Title VI. In a simple, really basic way to think about it, if you have a court hearing, whether it be criminal, civil, immigration court, whatever it might be, you're entitled to a translator. And so with an immigrant population individual, it's important to identify yourself as being LEP and ask for language assistance, even if the provider may not be obligated to provide it under federal law, under the Civil Rights Act. They may still be able to have these services provided to you. For example, at Legal Services, at my organization, we have contract with Language Line Solutions, and we can provide translation in any language over the phone if a client comes in. And so it's important to identify that. In my experience, oftentimes, especially with languages that aren't as commonly spoken, they bring in friends, children, abusers, and it just really messes things up. These people aren't certified translators. They are privy to private information. They may not translate right, and it just causes all sorts of problems. And so if you can use a translator, it's going to really help. And so I always would seek that in different ways. And I think we have the ability to provide that through phone and video conferencing now with technology. So we'll move on. I just wanted to bring this little information up. What I tend to deal with, again, I don't deal with criminal matters. I deal with civil matters, and I deal a lot with immigration related, like petitions to the immigration services for immigration status. So these documents are kind of things that are useful in that sense, but really they can be useful in anything. When we're talking about domestic violence and when you're thinking about someone who's got to leave the house, grab the kids and go, or whatever it might be, these are really important documents that may be needed later for whatever reason, whether it be to, prepare your criminal case against the abuser, whether it be to apply for immigration benefits through the immigration services, or to build your case, whatever it might be. And so I bring these ideas up because these maybe are instinctive to think about, but if you are planning to get out of that violent situation, these are things to try to put together. And maybe if you have the ability, even start making copies or leave it with a friend or put it on a flash drive, what it might be, because all this stuff can be really useful later down the line. And then I finally close, here's my last slide. I just wanted to kind of close on some information of what I deal with. Like I stated, I deal mostly with civil immigration service type petitions with immigrants. So these are people that may be abused and they don't have the proper legal status of green card or citizen. And they're in a very vulnerable situation because that's often used against them. Their immigration status is a way to abuse them, way to keep them in this abusive situation, or oftentimes they're purposely intentionally targeted because of their immigration status, because they fear reporting, because they fear having anywhere to go. So there are a lot of options. The Federal Immigration Services has provided a lot of different ways to get immigration status. I just bring up 3 here. You may have heard of the VAWA petition, and I use the form which is connected with USCIS, which is United States Citizen and Immigration Services. That's the federal agency that processes all immigration paperwork. So the Form I-360, you'll notice that's used for number 1 and 4. That's both for a victim, a domestic violence victim, a battered spouse. So really the requirement there is that you're just married to a US citizen or a green card holder and been abused, and you can then apply for your green card through that. Number 4, I mentioned the SIJS Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. This is a petition, a process for minors under 18 that are abused, maybe neglected, abandoned, and they too can seek immigration status through establishing that their parents aren't able to take care of them for whatever abusive situation they're in. There's the popular U visa that many have heard of, probably because that covers a wide range of if you're a victim of like 28 different criminal activities. It can range from domestic violence, kidnapping, perjury, whatever it may be. If you're an immigrant victim of crime, you can petition U visa. And then there's the T visa, which is more specific. That's for trafficking. That includes both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And it's not just your typical sense of, you might have been brought here to be prostituted. Of course, that does cover a T visa, but it may be a situation. I had a client, for example, that was brought into the United States and forced into an abusive marriage and was not allowed to leave her home and was raped and abused. And so we were able to apply for a T visa through that situation. But he wasn't actually, prostituting her to others, but because of the situation. So that can be broad as well. But basically, these are some immigration remedies that are able to help maybe people that are undocumented or don't have the right immigration status get immigration status so that they can then, work on working and being here and settling things. So I'm happy to answer any questions. That's just kind of a great big overview. But I do recommend, if you're ever in any situation as an immigrant, always ask for a lawyer. You're entitled under the law in a criminal situation. With immigration proceedings, with civil proceedings, you're not entitled, but you would have to pay. But that can definitely make sure that you have your rights known, and so you're not just sent out. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that informative presentation. So the floor is open. Any questions about immigration and domestic violence? So is legal services an entity they can go to if they're a victim to help with for immigration, a legal assistance or not?
Definitely, if it's domestic violence related, we help all sorts of domestic violence immigrant clients, yes. Just as long as it's not criminal. But if it's applying for immigration status, yes, we can do that.
Great, good. Anybody have any questions? I know that was a lot, but at the end, we have all the information, so you can always reach out to them later. And again, when we finish with all the panelists, we're going to open the floor so we can have a broader discussion as a group and questions and comments about the different arenas. So anybody have any questions? Wow, y'all so quiet. You saving them or writing them down and getting them ready?
Oh, I got one
so.
question. This is Archie Jennings.
Okay,
from
Archie.
Council. Many times when people come in, I'm not sure, but do they have to pay for these petitions? Because many times they don't have money. So that was my other question, is whether or not these visas that you mentioned require funding.
So generally there's a fee waiver for most petitions. The ones that I list here are all free because they're for victims. But even for ones that aren't free, you can get a waiver if you're low income. The only exception that comes to mind where you can't waive the fee is the naturalization to become a US citizen. You do have to pay that. That's fine, after you have the green card.
Okay.
We have a question from Jessica Holiday. Jessica, you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, I found a raised hand. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just thinking about how it would apply to us at JFL in the case management social work department. And I'm watching this and it's just a scenario, it never happened, but I'm thinking about when we have to airlift people from the hospital. Some of it, if they're immigration, if they don't have their papers or anything, we usually have issues with customs and everything. So what, in a fake scenario like that, what does it look like for someone maybe escaping from abuse and needs to be airlifted, but they don't have their papers in order?
Good question.
So technically, it's kind of a complicated answer. It all kind of depends on what their status is. If they have a status and they need to be airlifted, it probably shouldn't be an issue. If they are undocumented, technically they are staying within the United States, so there might be something you can do about it, but it can be trouble. You know, it really what it comes down to is within the immigration federal system, you have ICE, which is like the enforcement, that's like the police. And then you have the Custom and Border Patrol, which is the people that like, inspect and decide who can come and go. And then you have the USCIS portion, which is the paperwork group. So they're like the nice part of the immigration people. So sometimes you can work with a certain department with the immigration services, under the DHS, the Homeland Security department's branches. But it would probably really depend on how urgent it is, what the situation is, what their status is. Feel free to give my office a call, or even the Attorney General's office a call. I actually just had a call like this a week ago with the Attorney General's office, and it wasn't an emergency, but we were figuring out a way to get a minor some medical assistance and that needed to be evacuated. So there's things you can do to work around it, but it really would depend on the facts. Unfortunately,
Thank you.
I hate hearing that from lawyers, I'm sure.
Thank you, Ms. Holliday. The next question from Ms. Wong. Ms. Wong, go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. I think the presenter just answered partially what I wanted to ask about, because there are many times there are migrant women from the Caribbean living, for example, in Brooklyn or in New York, and they're having a difficult time to get sorted out because in some cases they didn't go over, as we would say, straight, in a straight manner, getting all their papers together. So is there a focal point? Is there a website? Is there a number that these persons can be referred to?
I'm going to answer that, yes. And so one of my favorite websites that I always send people to is the USCIS.org website, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services website. They have all the forms, you can chat, and if you kind of know what you're looking for, they've got all these instructional documents, and they're a great resource. The other thing I wanted to mention is what I often use, and you can also get this from the USCIS.org website, is there's something called the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, F-O-I-A. And any individual can fill that out and make a request of the federal government, and then they can collect all their documents that have been filed on their behalf. So when you are missing documents and you need those things to build a case, if it's been filed, with the government, you can collect it through a FOIA request. And that form is also on the USCIS.org website. So those would be two starting points.
Thank you for your question, Ms. Wong. Ms. Stewart, you may go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon. I don't have a question, but I have not a suggestion, but we've had instances where ICE helped us with our victims, where they would all we had to do was we would just have to purchase their tickets, especially for medical purposes. Last year, I think we had like about 3 cases, and immigration really helped us. So I really appreciate them for doing that, because the clients were really in need. So there's help out there, and we just have to keep searching and exploring, asking questions, and like I know Clema is our sister island, our sister on St. Croix, who works with Women's Coalition, and we do the same thing in St. Thomas. So I would ask Clema questions, Clema would ask me, and so we can do that with each other. If we ask around, then we will find the help that we are searching for. So yes, there's help in the Virgin Islands.
Yeah, I thank you for that, because I have seen that, and we've worked with your agency as well, and we have seen they can be fantastic, especially if you can establish you're a victim. ICE can be very useful because they want to go after the traffickers, the abusers. They don't want to go after the victims. So we have seen them be able to help victims, you know, move to Florida, wherever it might be. So that is an option, but I would definitely say, you know, start with your providers and go that route, because they're a great resource. I appreciate you saying that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm trying to take it off. Thank you. Ms. Gumbs put in the chat, which is good. USCIS.org, that was mentioned by Attorney Krissta, is the information page for the forms. It would be very helpful. So it's in the chat if you need to jot it down, if you don't remember it later, that you can go on and take advantage of those resources. Any other questions or comments for Attorney
I should
Krissta?
actually clarify, I misspoke. It's uscis.gov, G-O-V, not org. I'm gonna put that in the chat. So,
Oh, it's .gov, yeah. So
yeah, that's what it is. Yes, I see she corrected that as well.
Yeah, she corrected and put .gov.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I misspoke.
It's all right, USC. We're still here, so it's just USCI.gov. Okay, Ms. Cruz had put a question in chat that I'm not sure I understand if she's still on the line. It looked like it started, but I'm not sure. It said, as a victim of domestic violence.
Can you,
yeah,
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you ask it? Because I didn't get the whole part in chat.
Okay, the question is, if there is a victim of domestic, I was trying to do something with a computer, so it just went before I even finished. But the question is, if there is a victim of domestic violence and has been on an island for a short period of time, will that person get assistance from legal services or elsewhere? Will she be,
Yeah, if she's here, if she's on island, we can assist her. So it wouldn't matter if she hasn't been here that long, as long as she's here.
Okay, so that's yes.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, if she's here a couple months, as she comes there, she will receive assistance.
Right, as long as she's here, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz. Anybody else have any questions for Attorney Krissta? Again, we have another section where you can ask more questions, and maybe she'll throw out some other things as well so we can get you going. Anybody else have any other questions or statements or comments before we move on? Okay, well then we'll go to our last panelist. And our last panelist is Attorney Holly Fulkerson. She's the Violence Against Women Act Project Director, Staff Attorney. She was originally from Wisconsin. She's a proud Packer fan. And I didn't get that, but I was told I have to understand football to get that. But Charlie is a proud Packer fan and cheesehead from Wisconsin. She joined the United States Air Force in '87. She has a Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. She has her JD from the University of Wisconsin Law School. She has spent 19 years dedicating legal career to helping people with limited means obtaining justice, which is pretty cool. She was appointed as executive director, so she's done some alcohol and drug treatment. She's worked with juvenile drug treatment program. She's done some work with Wisconsin Insurance Commission officer. She's prosecuted insurance agency companies that took advantage of the elderly. That's nice to know, because we know the elderly is taken advantage of all the time. So I'm glad she was doing that. Also, she started her own practice. She served as appointed counsel for the State Public Defender's Office, and she served over 75 individual and criminal matters. So she's done both criminal and civil law, so she can see both sides of it. She's been a guardian ad litem for elderly, developmentally disabled, and mentally challenged. That's pretty cool. Holly heard about the devastation that occurred in the VI after Hurricane Irma and Maria and closely followed recovery efforts. She relocated, came down to see how her and her husband could assist us in recovering, which is really nice. Since 2019, she's offered assistance, experience. She's here to experience a new culture, but more importantly, she's a lifelong public servant and she wants to continue to serve the public. And that's what's important. Thank you so much, Attorney Holly, for being here and contributing and really, really, really looking out for those that need it the most. You have it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis, and thank you everyone for participating in this really awesome forum. This is a really great informational event. I'm having a really good time. So Legal Services of the Virgin Islands provides legal assistance to individuals who meet certain income guidelines or who are over 60 or who are victims and survivors of domestic violence. So although Legal Services has some restrictions about who can access our services, the legal system itself does not have restrictions on who can access justice. We've all heard the term blind justice. And what that means is no matter what your race, your color, your gender preference, your sexual identity or your gender identity, your age, your unique or other abilities, or your citizenship status, the legal system treats everyone the same and we all have the same access to justice, or we're supposed to. Okay.
That's right, supposed to.
Okay. So the slides I've prepared set out some sections of the Virgin Islands law in detail. And because there's a time restraint and because I know you can all read, I'm going to give an overview and I won't read this word for word, but I want to catch the key points. Feel free to ask more questions for more details during the question and answer section. So under the, no, I'm sorry, back one. There we go. So, yep. Under the Virgin Islands law, to be considered a victim of domestic violence under the law and protected under the domestic violence laws, it means a person was subjected to domestic violence by a spouse, a former spouse, a parent, a child, any other person related by blood or marriage, someone who's a present or former household member, someone who the victim has a child in common with, or someone who has been their sexual or otherwise intimate partner, or they've been in that kind of a relationship. So if the act was perpetrated by one of those people, it's considered domestic violence if it is an act of assault, battery, burglary, kidnapping, unlawful sexual contact, rape, forcible or unlawful entry, coercion, destruction of property, harassment, threats, false imprisonment, stalking, and a violation of a restraining order. So harassment under the law is defined as engaging in purposeful, knowing, or reckless course of conduct involving more than one incident that alarms or causes distress to another person and serves no legitimate purpose. And that's under the domestic violence code. So that includes things like conduct like following someone around in a public place with the intent to distress or intimidate them, peering in windows, trespassing, coming upon the premises of the victim, so showing up at someone's house, intruding on privacy, creating a menacing or threatening situation. It can also include things like constant phone calls or text messages over and over, texting and calling someone, harassing them through the phone or text, and repeatedly showing up at someone's workplace unannounced. Those are all things that can be considered harassment. So if someone is a victim of domestic violence and you want protection, what do? So first you file a domestic violence restraining order complaint with the Family Division of the Superior Court. Now you don't need a police report. A Upon a showing of good cause, the victim who files the report will receive a temporary restraining order. And temporary restraining orders are very temporary because they're issued ex parte. And that means that the defendant or the alleged abuser does not have the opportunity to defend himself or to answer that complaint. It's issued immediately to protect the victim survivor. So within 10 days, a hearing has to be scheduled. Due process requires that the defendant has the right to a hearing within 10 days. And the judge will then take evidence and determine by a preponderance of that evidence whether to issue a permanent restraining order. And a preponderance of the evidence is most of the evidence. So 51% more likely than not, this occurred. At the time the complaint is filed, the plaintiff, who's the person filing the complaint, must request certain relief that he or she wishes the court to order the defendant or the alleged abuser to do. Okay. So at the hearing, the permanent restraining order hearing, the judge may grant any or all of the following relief, depending on whether it was, requested by the complainant or the petitioner, plaintiff. So the judge can order that the defendant is prohibited from committing further domestic violence, from having contact with the plaintiff or harassing the plaintiff or the plaintiff's relatives in any way. The judge can grant possession of the residence to the plaintiff and exclude the defendant from that residence if it's held jointly owned or leased by the parties. The judge can also enter a temporary restraining order or child custody order and establish visitation rights. And in that situation, the judge, the restraining order court will only do that if the issues have not been resolved or they're being litigated between the parties, which means that if there's an action that's pending in the family court, or if there was a custody or a visitation or a child support order that's already in place, the restraining order court won't get involved in that. They will direct people back to family court. The judge can also require the defendant to pay monetary compensation for losses suffered as a direct result of the domestic violence, and that can take different forms depending on the circumstances and the details. Judge can grant the plaintiff temporary possession of certain property, such as automobiles and keys and other things that they're going to need because the alleged abuser is being required to leave the premises. And finally, the judge can also order the defendant to receive professional counseling or other appropriate treatment, which could include things like anger management if it's appropriate. Okay. So once there's a permanent restraining order, once that's received, it's effective for a period of time not to exceed 24 months or 2 years. It can be less, not more than that. And any violation of a temporary restraining order or a permanent one constitutes a crime and is punishable by a fine not more than $5,000 or an imprisonment of not more than 180 days. So violating the restraining order as a civil restraining order is a crime. So basically, the restraining order is a civil remedy. And in some cases, the alleged abuser is also charged with the crime. And if that's the case, if the alleged abuser is charged with a crime, under the criminal code, he should be held in custody until being brought before the court and given conditions of release. It's what's called an advice of rights hearing. There are conditions of release that will remain in place until the criminal matter is resolved. Those conditions of release should, for obvious reasons, include no contact with the victim, but unfortunately, sometimes they don't. Victims of the crime of domestic violence, so when the abuser is charged with the crime, they're usually not informed of the subsequent release of the abuser from custody or any of the conditions of release. Often they don't receive a copy of the conditions of release. So that no contact conditions of release order, if it exists or if it prohibits contact with the victim, it's not immediately enforceable the same way a restraining order is. It doesn't provide the victim with the additional protections that I discussed previously. And that can be asked for in the domestic violence restraining order proceedings. So the take-home message here is victims need a domestic violence restraining order. The no contact or conditions of release order is not sufficient to protect the victim from future harm. So once there's a restraining order, or if there's other legal remedies that someone needs to seek, what are those legal solutions? What are those other legal solutions look like? So there's divorce. People can file for a divorce. They have to be an inhabitant of the Virgin Islands and domiciled here and resided here continuously and uninterruptedly for at least 6 weeks prior to filing a divorce action. So that's also an available solution. Another solution is custody. So, yeah, right there. So custody determination can be made by filing an action in the Superior Court and asking for legal custody, physical custody, or visitation. It can also, as I said, be made part of a permanent restraining order proceeding, but the key thing to keep in mind there is it's only valid, it's temporary. Those orders that are made by the magistrate in a restraining order proceeding are temporary. They're meant to protect the victim and the children for that short period of time, and they're only valid for up to the 2 years that a restraining order is valid. So really an action in family court should also be pursued for a long-term custody order. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention was support. So the law talks about people who are obligated to support each other, their husbands and wives, among others, and also, of course, parents supporting their children who are under the age of 18. As I said previously, temporary support can be part of a restraining order hearing and part of a divorce or custody action, or the person can file a separate action with the Department of Paternity and Child Support. Usually the family court prefers that actions are filed with paternity and child support because they're ultimately going to be enforced there and easier for them to manage. Okay, so the legal solutions I've discussed are available to all victims of domestic violence, people over 60, people with disabilities and behavioral health challenges, the LGBTQIA community, immigrants, and people who don't speak English. Legal system, as I said, does not discriminate against any of these populations. If you're competent to understand and you're able to assert your rights, you have legal avenues and solutions. But what about elderly and dependent adults who are not competent, who are not in a position to assert their rights, and they're being abused by a caregiver? Often, I think, as we've heard some other of the panelists say, caregivers are also often family members or significant others, and the abuse would then fall under domestic violence. So there are laws that address these concerns and create other legal solutions. Okay. So the Elder and Dependent Adult Abuse Prevention Act is a provision that defines abuse of an elder or an adult, and it means the physical, emotional, or financial abuse, neglect, abandonment, isolation, abduction, or other treatment resulting in physical or emotional injury, maltreatment, sexual contact with an elder or dependent adult, or financial exploitation of an elder or dependent adult by any person. So it also defines a dependent adult as someone between the ages of 18 and 59 who has limitations that restrict their ability to carry out normal activities or protect their own rights. So that's important because we're talking about protecting people's rights under the law. An elder is someone who, of course, lives here and is over the age of 60. So how does the act protect an elder or dependent adult? Under that law, there are certain individuals who are considered mandated reporters who must report a known or suspected instance of abuse. Okay, and a mandated reporter under that law is a person who has assumed full or intermittent responsibility for the care and custody of this person. And that can include, but is not limited to, people like staff members of a public or private care facility. It can be healthcare practitioners, clergy members, employees of the Department of Human Services, law enforcement agencies, among others. So those are the people who must report. This law, the Elder and Dependent Adult Abuse Prevention Act, also has a provision that provides that any person who's not a mandated reporter, who knows or reasonably suspects that an elder or a dependent adult has been the victim of abuse, may report the abuse to a local law enforcement agency. And it's important to note that the identity of people making those reports remains confidential unless you waive that confidentiality, except there's certain disclosures to some necessary agencies who may need to respond. So that's a confidential report that you can make if you feel like somebody is being abused by a caregiver or someone else who's in charge of their care. So to summarize, there's some legal solutions available to all victims and families. There's restraining orders, divorce, child custody, and child support. And in order to protect vulnerable seniors and dependent adults who cannot protect themselves, please report elder and dependent abuse if you see it. Thank you. And any questions?
Okay, thank you so much for that, Holly. We appreciate it. Great job. You also got great job from the audience. We only have about 15 minutes left. So I'm gonna take the liberty to open the floor to the audience. If there's someone that wants to say stuff, we're not gonna go back to the panel because the panel has spoken. So is there anyone in the group have burning questions? Is there anybody that wanna talk about their experience? Is there any part that you think in the special population we left out that you want to speak to the group about? Pam, if you want to tell you that you're rich, if you want to stay a little longer, we can extend it maybe another 5 or 10 minutes. Or if the group want us to go on and close out at 5, we will. We do have one more question here. Muriel is jumping off her laptop. Okay. All right. So we're not gonna have time for the panelists to say goodbye because time is the essence. But if there is anybody else that have a question, some burning, you can always reach out. We're gonna put up the resources. If the group wanted to stay a little longer and continue to have a conversation, we could do that. But I think I see the survey is up. So what we want you to do, please share your thoughts with us by taking the survey. You can add your comments at the end. We have a survey. Please, please click on and fill the survey. Ask your other questions if something is missing. If there's some other things you'd like us to bring to the community that would be helpful, we can do that as well. But I think at this point, most important, we want to thank you all so much for coming. I want to give a special thank you. I'm not getting off of this without thanking the committee who put this all together, which is Sheelene Gumbs, Pamela Toussaint, Debbie Benjamin, Levon Wise, Holly Fulkerson and myself. This wouldn't have taken place without these extraordinary Zoom crew women, Debbie, Pamela. I want to thank the media, and I want to thank all of you all for being here. Please fill out the form at the end. If there's other questions, other concerns, click it. Put it in the survey. We read everything and we try to move forward. Thank you all so much for being live and present. And guess what? Caring about special population, because it's going to take all of us to make a difference. Thank you so much for being here with the Women's Coalition. Have a good evening.
Thank you for the invite.
Thank you.
Especially our